Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Political Forum, where this is your chance to learn more about issues related to the city of Chicago. I'm Mike Jacobs, and joining us tonight is Stacy Davis Gates with the Chicago Teachers Union. Stacy, very nice to have you on tonight.
Thank you for having me.
All right, folks, so tonight we're talking everything about the Chicago Teachers Union and their negotiation for a fair contract moving forward. So if you have a question, comment, or concern, the number's at the bottom of the screen, 312-738-1060. That's 312-738-1060, and please tell your friends and family. They can also tune in online at cantv.org/hotline. That's cantv.org/hotline. Okay. All right, so so obviously we need an update. You know, a lot of people, have read the papers, looking at blogs, looking on social media, and they see that negotiations. Where are the negotiations in terms with the union and the city? Because a lot of people are like, hey, we're getting closer and closer to we're hearing, words that there could be a potential strike, possible strike. So where are we today?
Well, we are not as far along as we need to be at this point. We're still at the table. Negotiations have been frustrating for the teachers at the table. Our bargaining committee are filled with rank and file teachers. We have folks who are in the elementary school, teachers, assistants, school clerks, nurses, high school teachers, rank and file members. It's not Stacy and Jesse, Maria and Crystal. We are painfully frustrated at this point. The Chicago Public Schools came into contract negotiations with a set of proposals that rolled back basically everything that we've won in the previous two contracts. That's a problem. And then their counter proposals include giving us back 15% what we already have, and then another counter proposal gives us back 30% of what we already have. That's not bargaining. We didn't go into negotiations to win back things that we already have. We go into negotiations to build on the gains that we've already made.
Mm-hmm. So I understand. So this week you're in the midst of a strike authorization vote.
Yes, we are.
With members. So what's been happening yesterday, today, and it's going to go through tomorrow?
Yes, the strike authorization vote is Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So we're right in the middle of it, and we're counting up the votes. Members get an opportunity to say whether or not they want to strike. To authorize it. Many of our members see the strike authorization vote as an opportunity to continue to leverage the negotiating table. The ultimate goal of this process is to end with an agreed settlement between CPS and the teachers. And whether we go on strike or not, the outcome has to be a settlement that both parties can agree on. And so we are working hard to get that agreement. Our members hope that this strike authorization vote will provide some energy, some momentum to the table, and get CPS to a point of wanting to have a deeper discussion about our working conditions, which happen to also be our students' learning conditions.
So let's say you brought up the conditions. What are you looking for? What's the union want?
The union, the teachers, the folks in the classrooms who are caring for hundreds of thousands of students Monday through Friday in our school communities, they want a school community where we can offer and facilitate the best type of education. For the last 10 years, the Chicago Teachers Union, we've been fighting for the schools Chicago students deserve. And Chicago students actually deserve smaller class sizes. They deserve a nurse in every school community every day of the week. They deserve a social worker in their school community every day of the week, a librarian. Right now, 9 out of 10 schools with the majority black student population do not have a librarian or a library.
So it's when you're talking also with social workers. Why is that important?
Why is that important? Well, we live in a city where we get a casualty report every Monday morning on the newscast. And those casualty reports aren't just numbers to the people who are connected to them. Right? We have families that are suffering through obscene amounts of violence because of the places in which they live in the city. and those students come to school and they bring their trauma to school with them, and they deserve, quite frankly, social workers who are trained to deal with that level of trauma. Also, our school district is under state monitoring. The Illinois State Board of Education, they are currently monitoring our special education program, which was basically destroyed under Forrest Claypool's reign and Rahm Emanuel. And so now we're hoping to rebuild what we lost. Social workers play a very important role in assigning services to special education students. They do. And not just an important role, a legal role.
And you brought up the special education. So is is there a deficit in terms of services for special education and for people who are where English is not their first language?
Absolutely. So I'll say it like this. In 2017, the Illinois General Assembly passed a funding formula, evidence-based funding formula. That funding formula provides an appropriation of money to school districts to lower class sizes, to fund English language learning services, wraparound services, special education. It prioritizes districts where their students live in concentrated poverty. So the Chicago Public Schools is getting about $1 billion more and appropriated money from the state to do those things. However, when that money comes to the Chicago Public Schools, it is not appropriated to the school communities in the same manner. So what we are doing in Chicago is basically replicating the areas of inequities that have existed prior to the passing of this funding formula. Look, the funding formula got a lot of things right. The funding formula could fund all of the demands that we've put forth in our contract. We expect to see smaller class sizes because the state is actually funding smaller class sizes.
So where are we? Because so you're saying hopefully you're going to get the results announced on the vote later this week. What happens after now the results are announced?
Well, so we stay at the negotiating table. That's the first thing that happens. We do not leave the negotiating table. And our members will have an opportunity to do a couple of things. File a 10-day notice to basically indicate the first day that teachers could go on strike. Our members will also have the opportunity to set an actual deadline, a strike deadline, so we all understand the urgency at the table. Again, the bottom line is to get a settlement that represents the best type of contract for our school communities and for the people who work in them and for the people who need them to work.
And the threshold is 75%, right?
The threshold is 75%, which is quite interesting because no other union in the state of Illinois, especially a teachers union, has to jump through those hoops. You know, you have to ask yourself why Chicago has such a separate and inequitable manner in which we bargain contracts, in which we take strike votes, in which we operate our schools. We're also the only school district in the state that is under mayoral control with an appointed school board. You know, I hear a lot from our critics about taxpayers, and taxpayers shouldn't have to foot the bill for generous contracts. You know, I think the moral outrage, quite frankly, is that we have a taxing body. The Chicago Board of Education is a taxing body, and that taxing body does not respond to the public. It is not held accountable to the public. It is accountable to one person. We have a long history in this country of kind of revolting against that type of anti-democratic behavior.
So that's an excellent point. No taxation without representation. Right?
Exactly. And so I think that is the larger moral outrage for taxpayers, is that they actually do not have a say in terms of that type of representation on the Chicago Board of Education. We always talk about parents not having agency in that way. Today at the Board of Education meeting, we saw parents from Back of the Yards, which is an IB school, which is a brand new school, have very real grievances about the lack of access their children have to the library in the school.
So speaking of that, there's been some feedback today. That would come out. So CPS CEO Janice Jackson says that she's optimistic about a contract agreement. You know, and that's stating that pointing to the 16% raise over the next 5 years that's being offered. What is your take on her saying that she's being optimistic that something's gonna happen?
Well, I think it's pretty tone deaf. Our members have been very clear about working conditions. When you bargain a contract, you're bargaining a contract based on a set of things that workers need, and in our case, students need. We're not like on an assembly line passing widgets through. We're actually in a classroom in school communities with real people, young people, who we form real bonds with and relationships. And so our work is to provide and facilitate the type of space that will imbue achievement, that will imbue good citizenship, that will provide equity and some justice. And to just boil this down to a pay raise slaps in the face of the psychology of folks who choose to teach in the Chicago public schools. There's not one person that I've ever met who said, I'm going to apply for a job in the Chicago public schools because I want to be a millionaire.
That's an excellent point. So I want to get to another point, but first we have a caller. Caller, do you have a question or comment?
Hello.
Yes, hello.
Hi. Thank you very much for taking my call. I've been listening, and I have two questions for the guests based upon some of the things I've heard already. My first question is, when Mayor Lightfoot was running for her current office, one of the things that she said was that she really wanted an elected school board in Chicago. And I just wanted to know, kind of based upon the things that you have seen as an educator, do you foresee that happening under her administration? The second question I had related to a report I saw this morning on WBEZ, which talked about selective enrollment schools and about how they probably serve about 62,000 students here in Chicago, but they take up a lot of resources, and in the past 10 years, those schools have become less diverse and busing students even from school to school. It serves to not necessarily facilitate the diversity that it did 10, 15 years ago, and I just want to know if you think that sort of separating students in that way in terms of, selective enrollment or gifted or magnet or classical or what have you is part of the problem in terms of resources being evenly distributed to all Chicago public school students.
Excellent questions. Thank you, caller. I'll address the second one about selective enrollment first.
Well, I think the issue that we are missing in the selective enrollment discussion is neighborhood schools. And so if neighborhoods had schools where that were fully resourced, that offered programming that responded to the needs of the community, then selective enrollment spaces would be less necessary, right? What we do know, because of the data, is that selective enrollment schools, show high amounts of segregation, and that it is more difficult for Black students in the city of Chicago to attend them. So it would make sense, to be honest with you, that our neighborhood schools would be the focus and the priority of school leadership to fund them and to make sure that they had what they needed. And in this concept of under-enrolled schools is quite a curious one. One of the trends that we've seen, especially schools on the south side and the west side, that the district has labeled as under-enrolled, are also spaces where you see some of the highest class sizes. So in spaces that conceivably have space to have smaller class sizes, those are also the same spaces in which you're seeing oversized classrooms more than not.
And her first question, would an elected school board, do you think that will it happen? Because that's something that Mayor Lightfoot said, that she's going to look into doing.
Well, that's what the struggle is about right now, is that, our mayor ran on a set of promises and principles to transform the Chicago public schools, to democratize school governance by agreeing to do an elected school board. One of the first maneuvers that was made even before she was sworn in was to tell the Senate president to put a brick on the bill, which in Springfield speak means to not call it for a vote. And so that was disappointing. There were all types of utterances about why, which also do not connect to the fact that she's also never engaged a coalition of parents and community groups and educators who have worked tirelessly to put this out. She has not really worked well with the bill sponsors and bringing it to the fore either. So there are a host of issues with that. But that's not very different from how some of the advocates from the immigration community or the police accountability community or the affordable housing community or the homeless community advocates have felt about the promises that were made to them as well on the campaign trail. That's why this contract fight is very important to us, is because an actual contract is an opportunity to get in writing which the things that were promised.
Again, caller, thank you for those questions. Another thing I want to get to, that came out this evening, the Sun-Times editorial board. They wrote and said, take the deal. And you won.
Well, so again, tone deaf, right? Because you can't win when your students lose. And when our students do not have the very fundamental basics of a public education, then how can you call that a victory? I also find it curious that this is the same editorial board that excoriated, rightly so, excoriated the Chicago Public Schools over the special education scandal, the lack of school nurses, the sex abuse scandal, excoriated them. And the things that we're asking for in this contract, a school nurse, a social worker, those are frontline staff needs for schools that need to figure out how to right those wrongs. And if you don't have trained staff, those who understand, who are licensed and credentialed to do this work in place, then how do you right those wrongs? How do you make special education whole in the Chicago public schools without a case manager, without a social worker, without a nurse? All of those people are legally required to be at the table. How do you make students feel safe in school communities, heard and protected in school communities without the necessary trauma supports in place? And so for an editorial board who got those issues right, they're getting this one wrong. Again, and I'll say this, I've not met one person who said that they wanted to work in the Chicago public schools because their goal was to become wealthy.
Yeah, they say that given our city's dire financial condition, taxpayers wouldn't rally around them, and please don't forget the 300,000 school children who'll be sitting at home with nothing to do if the teachers walk out.
So a few things. Our members live in the city of Chicago, and they are taxpayers. And they are proud taxpayers in the city of Chicago. So they pay taxes, they live in Chicago, and they work in Chicago. So I don't think that they're speaking for our members with respect to that. And number two, the moral outrage is that we have an appointed school board that is unaccountable to taxpayers. They are a taxing body. And I think even more so is that if we care about students and we care about the type of education that they deserve, then we would be behind the fight of teachers to secure those things. They're getting it wrong. The learning conditions of our students are the working conditions of our teachers, and they have every right to put forth that fight. And one small thing about the whole pay wage argument that is being levied by the editorial board is that it is conspicuously absent of the discussion of our school clerks and our teachers' assistants whose children qualify for free and reduced lunch. Conspicuously absent of that discussion. So we have women who are largely Latina and African American who are in school communities that do not pay them a fair wage, one in which they can comfortably lead their households. Chicago is becoming increasingly expensive. And for women who work in Chicago, who are dedicated to making the lives of our children better, for them to live under poverty based on federal guidelines is a significant issue that is conspicuously missing from their discussion.
Well, it seems though people are hearing it. People outside of Chicago is definitely hearing about what's going on here, because you've had political endorsements from Democratic presidential frontrunners Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, and Bernie Sanders was just here last night.
Absolutely.
And so talk about that and the energy behind that and the messaging behind those three leaders and what it's doing.
Well, I think it's pretty obvious is that while, the fifth floor of our city government space, while the editorial board want to replay tired tropes of greedy teacher narratives, is that the rest of this country and top tier contenders for the White House have figured it out. And they understand that teachers are doing the work to transform our country. Teachers are doing the work to maintain the democracy in our country, to figure out how students become the best that they can be. And they are willing to put their reputations, their campaigns behind that. That says a lot about the work that our members have done over time to raise these issues. And teachers nationally, West Virginia, Los Angeles, North Carolina, Arizona, Colorado, Sacramento, Oakland, the list goes on with teachers who are raising their voices for equity, for parity, for justice, for what makes sense in our classrooms. We're not asking for things that are unreasonable. We're asking for very basic, fundamental tools to do the work in our school communities.
Yeah, definitely the nation is watching you and looking at what's going on here.
Yeah.
So we have to start wrapping up here, but I wanted to get this across to you. So we've, nationally people are talking about it. What are locally in Chicago, what are you hearing from parents, from community members, community leaders outside of, the city? What are people telling you?
Well, I'm a parent.
Yeah.
I have 3 children. All 3 attend the Chicago Public Schools. And as a parent, these aren't talking points. My son's school had a librarian since the time he started at his school. This year we don't have a librarian because she's the 6th grade teacher. Right? When we talk about the issues of filth in our buildings, we've experienced that at my son's school. So these, again, are not talking points. So parents, communities, families are having very real experiences in the Chicago Public Schools. They don't need our narration. That is their experience. What we are doing is that we're taking those experiences and we're pushing forward a fight to start righting the wrongs and transforming our school communities. Look, the mayor of this city, she ran on every campaign proposal we've put forth. She promised us transformation. We're asking for her to put it in writing. She says that what we're asking for is in the budget already. So if it's in the budget already, then that means that she can put it in writing. I think these requests are simple.
So as we got to wrap up here now, what should the people, parents, expect it's going to be happening, within, the next, 7 to 10 days, obviously after this vote, but try to wrap it up in a nice bow.
Look, we're going to stay at the table and negotiate for the school Chicago students deserve. Teachers work for the common good, and so we're going to bargain for the common good as well.
And so we can actually show people, if they're interested in learning more about what's going on, they can go right here to this website. It's ctulocal1.org. You can learn about all the things that are important for the union and basically and what they're bargaining for. There's a lot of information there. So if you're interested, that is ctulocal1.org. Stacey, thanks so much.
Thank you for having me. We appreciate this. Thank you.
And thank you, callers, for calling in. Thank you, viewers, for watching. This has been Political Forum. My name is Mike Jacobson. Joining us tonight has been Stacey Davis Gates with the Chicago Teachers Union. Tune in to Political Forum every Wednesday at 7 p.m. where we have great guests. And until next week, everyone, please have a good night.